Difta, Tomma dinar, Fatlakenohui. I was just speaking in Cornish, or at least I was trying to anyway. This is the Cornish language. Did you know that there are many native languages in the British Isles, even existing before the English language, some of which are still used today? One of these lesser known languages in England is a language called Cornish, and this is what I want to look at today, and it's where I was brought up in Cornwall. So it's the southwest of England, and it has its own language completely separate from English. In order to understand this, we should have a look back at the history to see how this language developed and what happened to it. So I'm going to start this video by giving an introduction to the history, a brief history about the Cornish language and the smaller languages in the British Isles, why English became the dominant language. Then I'm going to give you some Cornish phrases, I'm going to do my best Cornish and try to give you some sentences and words in the Cornish language. And I'm going to show you a little bit about place names as well, and why the names of places in like Wales and Cornwall are a little bit different. So according to Wikipedia, there are 14 indigenous languages, native languages, in the British Isles. 5 of them are Celtic languages. So we're going to focus on these Celtic languages today. The Celts, or the Celtic people, were a group of tribes, and they had many things in common, such as religion. They shared a similar language, they had similar traditions and culture as well. And these Celtic tribes and the culture began to develop as early as 1200 BC. This is quite a long time ago now, more than 3,000 years ago. These Celtic groups could be broken down into smaller categories. One of these groups were known as the Celtic Britons. Celtic Britons. These were the Celts who lived in Britain back in the olden days, kind of during the Middle Ages and before. After the Middle Ages, this group diverged into Cornish, Welsh, Bretons, and other groups as well. So hopefully by looking at the history here, you're going to see why there are different nations within the United Kingdom. Like, why do we have Scotland and Wales and England? Why are they separate? So this history is going to give you a little bit of insight into that, and why there are different languages as well. In the 1st century AD, about 2,000 years ago, the Romans invaded the island. And in doing so, they pushed a lot of the Celtic Britons to the west and the north parts of the country, basically away from what we call today England. The Roman Empire shaped early England, and that's why we have those different nations today. That's why Wales and Cornwall and Scotland are so different from England, partly because of the Roman invasion and how, the native indigenous people were pushed to the other side of the country. In fact, if you go to the border of England and Scotland, you can still see today the remains of the wall that the Romans built to try to keep the Scottish out, to stop them from invading again and taking back their land. I haven't been there myself, but it's on my bucket list. Today, the Celtic nations are Scotland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany, which is in France. Although today, unlike the others, Cornwall are considered part of England. They're not separate countries, for example, like Ireland. About 30 years after the Roman Empire fell, there was another invasion from the Anglo-Saxons. Now these were people from modern-day Denmark and Germany, and they started to kind of migrate over, invade the country, and they kind of came from the southeast of the country, which again is England. And this pushed the Celtic Britons even further west and further north. So of course today we're going to be focusing mostly on the Cornish, because that's what I'm most familiar with. Cornwall, by the way, if you look at this map, is in the very southwest of England. It's almost like a peninsula that's quite separate from the rest of the country, and it's separated by a river, the River Tamar. So the Cornish and the Anglo-Saxons in modern-day England, they were often fighting over land and things like that. They were fighting up until the year 936, and that's when the king kind of made the river the boundary between Cornwall and the rest of the country. So at that time, it was essentially a separate country. It was very, very different to the rest of England, and it had different language, different culture. Everything was different at that time. So yeah, at one point, the Celtic Britons were all over the country, but at this point, after the Anglo-Saxons have invaded and fought with the Cornish, Cornwall was really kind of the one area where the Celtic Britons had left, one of the few areas they had left. And it kind of strengthened that kind of Celtic identity. And even today, you can see quite a distinction between Cornwall and the rest of the country. There was even an unsuccessful Cornish rebellion against the king in 1497, and this was when they refused to pay taxes to support something the king was doing. What we call today Cornish and Welsh languages kind of diverged from a common Brittonic language. This was like the language that they came from, the father language, if you like. And remember, these were existing in the British Isles before English was kind of developed by the Anglo-Saxon tribes. So if you want to really simplify it, you could say these Celtic languages were kind of the original languages in the British Isles, and English actually came from Europe originally, although of course it's gone through many changes since that time. However, different Celtic nations have had varying degrees of success in preserving and keeping their language. So if you go to Wales, for example, many road signs will be in Welsh. You can listen to Welsh radio, Welsh TV shows. You may even hear some people speaking Welsh on the street or in the pub as well. So there's a lot of Welsh when you go to Wales. Cornish is very similar to Welsh. It sounds quite similar, but it's much harder to find. And I kind of went for a walk around my area and I tried to film some Cornish on signs and shops and things like that. It's not so easy to find. If you go down west, there is much more Cornish language, which you can see on the signs and a little bit more integrated into the culture. So in the year 1700, there were only 5,000 Cornish speakers left. In the year 1800, there were practically none. Cornish was considered an extinct language at that time. However, in the 20th century, the Cornish language underwent a revival. A revival is like bringing it back to life. So now the Cornish language is slowly becoming more popular. It's taught in a few schools around the county, and more people are learning it, although no one knows it as a first language. But there are a few people who are fluent. I think it was about 2,000 people who claimed to be fluent in the last census that was done. So I'm still a beginner in Cornish. I recently decided to start learning it. It's not really a useful language at all, but since it's my home county, I wanted to kind of connect to the history, learn a bit about my ancestors, and all that kind of stuff. So I am a beginner, so keep that in mind when I'm sharing these phrases. My pronunciation is not great, because there's a lot of sounds that are very different to English, I would say. And yet, to answer a question that many of you will maybe have, is Cornish is completely different from English. There are many words that have been loaned from English into Cornish, and that's simply because Cornish is an old language and these words did not exist at the time in Cornish. For example, Wi-Fi is diwi and rugby is rugby. So it's the same word, right? Just kind of said in a different way to kind of fit that Cornish pronunciation. But besides those loan words, the languages are totally separate. They're not connected in history. So there's different grammar, different sentence structure, different pronunciation, different vocabulary. Everything is quite different. So that's one thing you'll notice. But yeah, I should also say, keep in mind that, as I said, almost no one knows the language. So even if you come to Cornwall, you don't need to learn any phrases. This video is purely for education, and English is always going to be totally fine in Cornwall. So let's go over a few Cornish phrases now. Hello in Cornish is difta, difta. Again, my pronunciation isn't perfect perhaps, but literally this means day good, day good. So it's just good day, hello. What I said at the beginning of this video was fatla genochwi, fatla genochwi. This is kind of like, how's it going? I think it's kind of a casual way to say, how are you? How's it going with you guys? It's plural way to say, how's it going? Another one is thank you, which is muraz. Muraz. Thank you. O femblof yw now warren ugans miss Genver. But yeah, you can see it's quite different to English, right? It doesn't sound very similar at all. The one place where you will see a lot of Cornish is in place names. So when you go to places like Cornwall and Wales, you'll notice that the names of places are very, very different from the rest of England. And this is because a lot of the names are from these Celtic languages. Although most Cornish people don't actually know what these place names mean, I think it's quite interesting to know, and it kind of gives a little bit more background to why they're called this. So one example is the prefix like pole, which sounds quite similar. It means like a pool, as in like a place where there's water. So there's a very beautiful beach in Cornwall called Polzeath. Polzeath. It's got the pole for like a pool of water. Pen, P-E-N, means kind of the end of something, usually the end of the land, right? So a very famous place in Cornwall is Penzance. It's kind of the end of land, I guess. I don't know why. I guess it's the end of the train line, to be fair, but that's probably didn't exist back in the days of the Cornish language. Penryn is another example. It means the end of something, end of land, headland. Another really common one is TRE, tr. This means like a homestead, where a place where there are homes, basically. You see it all over the place in Cornwall, like Trelisic, for example. I don't know what the last bit means, but tr means homestead. Okay, I'm going to leave this video here. I hope it was interesting. It's not my usual kind of video, because this is English with Michael, and today I spoke about a whole nother language. But this is still a language in England. You know, Cornwall is part of England. This is a language of England. And I think it's really good to know this, and it's just really interesting, I find. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more little videos about Cornish language, and maybe some more languages, let me know. I do have a plan to kind of do an adventure into Cornwall one day, and maybe even meet someone who speaks Cornish, who I could practice with, and maybe take a quick video as well. So if you want to see that, let me know. That's kind of it's on the back burner, you know, it's my plan for the future. But yeah, thank you for watching this, or should I say muraz, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye, do genis.